doubles and coffee. Imagine the Trinidad and Tobago newspapers, the Pnm'S fake news media, putting an article that Stuart Smallpin Young accuses the Ministry of the People under the UNC of not following procurement procedure by not leaving up the tenders for security services at different offices up on the official website of the ministry. And this is a breach of procurement, says Stuart Smallpin Young. And the Guardian newspaper, the Guardian of Rowley's K-Pax, Stuart Smallpin Young K-Pax, and the Guardian of Balize House tries to make that a story in Trinidad and Tobago, where Stuart Smallpin Young, that same individual, went down to Australia with Keith Christopher Rowley. They drank scotch and eat shrimps with CEOs and executives of Hostel and Incat, absolutely private sector companies. They then said, listen, you all bid for some vessels, and also, even though the Coast Guard doesn't want any vessels, and they didn't ask and they didn't give a request, and there was no in detailed analysis of the needs for 2 more warships or 2 more cutlass vessels, we go take 2 of that. And here what to do, Hostel and Incat. Don't have no board, we have no board for no ferry and so on, because that's Allison due diligence Lewis. And Rowley lied and said that the board had not, when they tendered or they asked requests for tenders and for proposals, that they received none. Total lie. Freedom of information request showed that there were 11 vessels that offered themselves to be the ferry service for Trinidad and Tobago. But Rowley, having lied, then went with Smallpin down to Australia, met with goods and service providers, and then told them, listen, send your bids to this committee headed by this fellow, Stuart Smallpin Young. And then Stuart Smallpin Young and his small committee, which included other cabinet ministers, this committee, which superseded, came after the committee headed by Shamfa Kujo and members like that with Pnm'S and so on, a cabinet committee that procured the galleon's passage. They were supposed to lease a fast ferry because the sea bridge had collapsed, and this ministerial procurement committee purchased for 120 million a slow boat that nobody wanted to go on, that as you sit on it, you vomit slow, the galleon's passage. But I digress. So these 2 companies, Hostel and Incat, then send their proposals direct to the minister, Stuart Young, who said he sat and chaired a committee who analyzed these bids. They then noticed that one bid, Incat's bid, was lower, and Hostel's bid was some 10 million US higher. So they shared Incat's secret bid information with the other competitor, Hostel. And then Hostel lowered their bid price. And then that committee, headed by Stuart Smallpin Young, handed out like dinner mints 1 vessel for the Tobago crossing across Tobago and Trinidad, one of the ferries to Incat, and the other one to Hostel, at a whopping $300 million extra over and beyond that Wade Mark brought out in the Senate. That is Stuart Smallpin Young procurement. That, and they tried to say that it was government to government. It had nothing to do with no government. Hostel and Incat have nothing to do with the Australian government. And then on top of that, they took 2 cutlass vessels, just purchased like that. Stuart Smallpin Young is talking about procurement. Stuart Smallpin Young was the man in 2017 with Rowley, when the chemical engineers and the brilliant public servants under the leadership of Jerry Brooks at NGC were negotiating tooth and nail with the upstreamers like EOG and BPTT, and they were haggling over half a cent here, quarter cent there per MMBTU. This procurement warrior now, the Stuart Smallpin Young, went to Houston with Rowley, threw out all the brilliant, intelligent chemical engineers who know the business and were fighting for Trinidad and Tobago's share of the pie. And they concluded negotiations with the upstreamers, which then made NGC make a loss for the first time in history. 11 companies at Point Lisas shuttered, shut down, slowed down, and stopped production because they could not, the business was not viable, because the upstreamers had made 67 to 69% increase in profits, which was recorded in the annual statements just a year later, after the negotiation, the procurement done by Stuart Smallpin and Keith Rowley in Houston. And this man is talking, has the audacity to sit there and talk about security services and whether it was left up on a website. This Stuart Smallpin was part and parcel of the Pnm government that brought procurement legislation to the Parliament and the Senate to weaken it, to allow TFIN to loosen the locks and the scrutiny and the checks and balances that Kamla Prasad Bissessa had left there in the procurement legislation, to take things out like disposal of assets, like medical supplies and legal fees. This man, Stuart Smallpin Young, is talking about procurement, and then he was the Minister of Energy when 4 men were left in a pipe to die. And Rhoda Barrett was saying that the one survivor who came out was a liar and that the pipe was blocked up. She never go in no pipe, you know. She didn't go down, she didn't dive down, she didn't see, she know nothing about pipe. She probably ain't get no pipe in a long time, but was talking and criticizing one of the divers who came up and said, my friends are down there, go and save them. Stuart Richard Young Smallpin was the Minister of Energy. Piper, Newman George, they took decisions to leave the men in the pipe for 39 hours to suffocate and to die with inaction, inactivity, and lack of decision. In fact, the decisions have been labeled as criminal in a commission of inquiry. It is this same Stuart Young under the Ministry of Energy and Keith Rowley who refused to accede to a Freedom of Information request to learn about the fees paid to which lawyers, while the divers' families suffering and have not received a cent, and they refused to divulge the information, so much so that the court had to say that Stuart Richard Young's mentor, Dr. Keith Christopher Rowley, was wrong. He was oppressive, he was secretive, he was breaching the law, the Freedom of Information Act, to not share information on lawyers' fees paid to Pnm lawyers, to attack the victims, to attack and abuse the families of dead divers. This is the man, Stuart Smallpin Young, who is talking about procurement being up on our website at the Ministry of the People and that the government is breaching procurement. What about the crime symposium that Rowley and Smallpin had at the Hyatt that cost some $11 to $15 million, and there was no procurement? Total breaches of the procurement legislation, so much so that the Attorney General Lymore of the Pnm had to bring a bill to Parliament to try to retroactively make the procurement correct because it was a breach, to save them from the arms of the law for breaching procurement. And the Guardian media has the audacity to talk and print and promote Stuart Smallpin Young as some fighter for democracy, fairness, competition, and equity, a man who reached the heights of the Pnm without even following the democratic process, without going through an election, without going up for leadership of the Pnm that Rowley put there, just because he and his daddy is friends with Rowley and they have a lot of business interests. That is the man who's talking about procurement. He couldn't even procure his position as Prime Minister of the country properly. He was selected, every rule breach from Pnm to Constitution, and he's a Kobo Sweat, shortest so-called selected Prime Minister in the history of Trinidad and Tobago. Talking about procurement, the only thing he could procure is a cocktail from Imran Khan, who he bullied for 5 years, get beat and throw in a dustbin. He procured the name Dustbin Terrier. Stuart Smallpin Dustbin Terrier. Guardian newspaper, well, you're sick, that's why nobody cares. You waste a time, Guardian Media Limited. You will make another loss of 15 to 20 million this year. Keep it going. Keep the lies. And to Trinidad and Tobago, reject the PNM. We have moved forward. Guyana got rid of the so-called opposition that was in government. We must follow and do the same. Calling a new party with a new young leader to take up the slack from the PNM so that in 2030, the PNM will not even be in opposition. Small pen talking about procurement. Well, boy, I laugh till I get asthma. Bless.